do. So let's start diving into innovation diffusion theory in a little bit more detail. So we'll start with component 1, and that is, firstly, we need to look at the attributes or the characteristics of our focal innovation. So again, remember, diffusion theory is all about understanding what we can do to improve the uptake or adoption of innovations. And I guess this model largely is founded on the idea that, look, some innovations diffuse or are adopted more quickly and more widely than others. Other types of innovations can diffuse very slowly or weakly, as I've got in that first dot point up there. And some innovations are never adopted, or they might be adopted to some extent, but then they're abandoned. So you can think of some of those, I guess, from your own experience. If you have perhaps tried new things, new products, new services, new apps, new sorts of technology, all those sorts of things, some types of any of those sorts of things can be adopted more quickly and really rapidly, and others just don't take off at all. So diffusion theory helps us to understand why that is. Why are some things adopted well and others aren't? So this first component, attributes of the innovation, is important because it helps to break down what our innovation is and the different parts of it. So this is about how individuals in a social system perceive a particular innovation. And so as part of diffusion theory, it says there are 5 attributes of innovations that people look at, and for each of those, depending on how they perceive it, it will either increase their rate of adoption or potentially decrease it. So the first is relative advantage. So basically, is the innovation better than what was there before? So if you think about technology innovations, for example, and I think in one of my classes, some students raised with me the example of Google+. So Google came out with this product called Google+. It was something I think everybody who had a Gmail account then also had created for them automatically, I believe, what was called a Google+ account. And I have to say I was a non-adopter of this particular product. So I have a Google+ account, but I have never ever used it. And I think it was, in a way, Google's attempt to try and take some market off of Facebook. So it had a social networking aspect there where you can post things up about what you're doing and that kind of stuff. But it never really took off. So relative advantage for that example is the innovation better than what was there before? And well, it would seem that probably a lot of people felt, Google+ is not a lot better than what was there before. Perhaps, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, all those sorts of things. People didn't think that what was on offer with Google+ was necessarily better than what was already there. So for relative advantage, obviously, if people are going to adopt something more quickly, if an innovation is going to diffuse well, they need to see a relative advantage to that particular product or service. And compatibility, does the innovation fit with the intended audience of potential adopters? So does it fit with what people value, with what they've experienced before, with what they actually need a product or service to do? So if it is compatible with all of those things, then intuitively, and what this theory tells us, what diffusion theory tells us is, if an innovation is compatible with those things, then people are more likely to adopt it. If it's not, then they'll be less likely to. So one of the critical things that we can do with our innovations is make clear to people, how does this relate to what's come before? How does it relate to previous ideas or previous products or previous services? And that helps people to make a link between whatever your innovation is and what has happened in the past. And that helps to create, as I've got in that point there, it helps individuals to create some meaning around what an innovation is. Because remember, a lot of this is about people searching for information to reduce the uncertainty that they have about whatever your innovation is. Because it's about change and it's asking them to do something differently. So to reduce that uncertainty, they'll search for information. And if you can give them some guidance or signposts on how this fits with what's been there before, that can increase their rate of adoption. Next is around complexity. So intuitively this makes sense. Is your innovation easy to use or understand? Often technological or tech-based innovations can be quite complex, particularly if you're asking people to implement new systems or ways of doing their work. People generally, and this makes sense, you can think about it yourself, if you're asked to adopt something that's highly complex, it's really difficult for you to understand, then that's not going to encourage your adoption of it. In fact, it might encourage resistance to it. So if you can, as much as possible, make your innovation something that people are able to get their heads around, you know, offer some training or support and that kind of thing, allow people to understand what this is all about. If you reduce that complexity, then you'll probably have a higher rate of adoption than if you don't. Trialability is important as well. So can your end users actually have a go at using whatever your innovation is before it's perhaps fully implemented or adopted? So can they experiment with it? And one of the things that we're finding with new models of innovation that fall under this umbrella of open innovation, where organisations are actually co-creating their products or services with their end users, rather than having the end users be the people that see the innovation once it's actually finalised and it's finished and it's gone to market. Organisations are increasingly bringing those stakeholders into their innovation processes at the development stage to let end users have a go at whatever this new product or service is, give them some input into what the innovation is all about, and that comes to trialability. So the more that you can allow people to have a little play with and experiment with whatever your innovation is before you finally bring it to your market or your place where you want it to be adopted, then you're increasing then the chances that your innovation will be adopted well and efficiently and effectively. And lastly, observability. So can people see other people using it? Can people see how effectively or easily other people are using or adopting your innovation? And can people easily see whether others are doing that? Is it measurable in some way? So the more that others can observe people using this, whatever your innovation is, then you're again increasing your likelihood of positive adoption. Now, reinvention, I'll come to this a little bit later as well, is an important component here, and this comes to, I guess, trialability and observability a little bit. Reinvention is the degree to which an innovation can be changed or modified by somebody as they're actually adopting it. So is there some flexibility built into your innovation? Can users shift it or change it a little bit in order for them to adopt it as they're going through that process? And if they can, then that is going to increase their likelihood of not just adopting your innovation, but doing it sustainably, so actually continuing to use it over time. Now, why we care about innovation attributes, I hope intuitively it would make sense. So we can think about all of those different characteristics and we can start to design not just our innovations around them, but then how we actually design the adoption process and the communication process. So, for example, making our innovations not too complex and not too costly, that we know that can increase rates of adoption. Also thinking about, again, you can target your audiences in different ways. Making clear how an innovation can be used, making clear how others are using it, that comes to observability, making clear how users can potentially trial or experiment with an innovation, that comes to trialability. So really, all those different attribute categories, you can shape some messages around them to target to your audience, to make clear what those innovation attributes are for your particular innovation, and then helping reduce the uncertainty for your end users, giving them information around all of those different attributes. Communication channels. Let's take a short break because there's a little bit I want to talk to you about in communication channels. So we'll take a break and then we'll come back to this.